And thank you so much for inviting me to do this, Eric. It's really a great opportunity to be able to talk to such a wide range of adults about why early literacy really matters, not just to the children and parents and families, but to everyone in your community. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get this show started. And so, as Eric said, this is what everyone needs to know about early literacy, even if you don't have kids. And I am Melody Garcia. I am the early literacy librarian for the Growing Readers Together project of the Colorado State Library. And what we really do is focus on informal caregivers, such as grandparents and nannies and babysitters that might not have the formal training, and really engage them with their local library to get early learning resources so that every child, regardless of their care situation, can have a really great start in their schooling. Whoop, too far. So this is really a passion for me. So I'm so excited to come and talk to you all about it, because for the last 20 years, I've been involved in early learning, both through preschools, through K-12 schools, and through libraries. And I have my own two amazing children, and I am a great lover of pretend play and mud pies. So you may be thinking, like, why does early literacy really matter? And so this is sort of our 6 degrees of separation from the child engaged in the learning. And of course, that closest tie is going to be their parents and caregivers. These are the ones that really have the strongest ties, the strongest bonds, and get the most from that early learning. They are going to watch that growth happen every day. And the more that they know about how to best help their child learn and what's actually happening behind the scenes, is the connection is very obvious. Again, with our close family and teachers, the people who spend a lot of time with these children are often their teachers, the people who are working in daycare centers, as well as their family, those grandparents that maybe even are not seeing them every day, but are still having that really close family connection. A lot can be done even if you don't live near the children in your life. Having Zoom and video chats, even with young infants, you're able to see them really respond and form those bonds and connections. But let's step back even more from that. If you have friends with kids, if you're a neighbor to families in your neighborhood, what could that connection to early literacy be for you? Why does that matter? And I have a lot of anecdotal evidence on why it really matters, but the Fred Rogers Institute has also done a lot of studies on how very simple interactions between just caring adults and children can really have an impact. If there's someone that you see, in your neighborhood, in the parks, on the paths, being able to have just that friendly connection, learning the child's name, pointing out something that you saw, a bird's nest, or pointing to a sign on the street, can really make a larger impression than you would think on that child. My daughter is famous for, we will plan these whole outings, and do all this work with her, but what she wants to talk about at the end of the day was, oh, did you see that man in the store? So it's really interesting how those really small interactions can make an impact on children. This is also really important if you step even further back for the people that work with those parents of young children. Understanding how important that early family bond is, understanding a lot of the needs of parents and their children really helps our workforce really support families and children, really support access to affordable childcare. And the more that you know about how children learn, the more you realize how much these issues matter. And that goes all the way out in our big circle. Even if you just live in a community, even if you try your best to avoid the children in your community, early literacy still matters, because early literacy matters to absolutely everyone in our society. And the reason for this is that return on investment. Studies have shown that programs targeting these early years have one of the highest returns of investment that you can get out of a social program. Studies have shown anywhere from $4 to $16 return on every dollar invested in early learning. It's a really big range, and one of those reasons is what exactly different studies have decided to take into account. Those really high returns on investment, those like $14 and $16 returns, come from studies that really start looking at early literacy investment as multi-generational. So not only do the children invested in do better, but their children do better. As we study more, we might find that their grandchildren do better. Investment in early literacy is a way to break poverty cycles and see huge returns, because when you invest early in early childhood education and early literacy, you have a better prepared workforce that affects the economy. You have less dependence on social services later in life. You have a reduction in crime. This is the best thing that we can do for our society, is investing in kids when they are little. And the reason for this is because of what is happening in those first 5 years. This is when children are building the foundation for everything else that they're going to learn. You can see in this chart how much is happening before we even start kindergarten. As soon as a child is born, their brains are receptive to learning. What this chart is actually measuring is how sensitive the brains are to learning, how many brain connections are being built in the brain with these learning stimuli. And even if you lived to be 100, you would have more brain growth and learning in the first 5 years than in the next 95 years combined. That's how much is happening right now in these very early years. Think of learning a language as an adult. If you've ever tried to learn a foreign language as an adult, it can be done, but it is a lot harder, because if you see on this green line, this is when your brain is just wired to suck in all that language learning. And it continues to decrease as time goes by. Now, it can be done, but it's harder. And similarly, children who start school without this strong early foundation can catch up, but it is more difficult, and many do not. Another way to look at this is with the picture of the actual brain neurons. So those brain connections that are being built, that is essentially the highways that all of our thoughts travel on. And just looking at this progression, like, what are some of the things that you first notice? One of the things that pops up to me is, even newborn, it's not a completely blank slate. They're already wired to start learning immediately from birth. But what I love to show everyone is that fourth slide over at 2 years old. What chaos inside that 2-year-old's brain. So everyone, I want to, if you take one thing away from this, it's that image of just this total overwhelming stimulation. So the next time you see a 2-year-old having a tantrum in a grocery store, bring this to mind. The child is not crying because she didn't get the blue cup. She's crying because the brain has not yet learned how to sort and process all the stimulus of information. There's not enough experience to easily follow a path to the proper emotional response. All of this is just being taken in like a sponge, and that filter is not yet in place. Whereas in an adult, you can see how much thicker the connections get. Those are those well-traveled paths, years of experience, so that our thoughts can immediately travel down the path to where we need to go to recall the information, to have the appropriate response. But it takes time. And we need to have the patience with children as they are doing this phenomenal amount of learning. So how are libraries supporting early literacy? When we look at libraries and when we talk about early literacy in libraries, we're talking about all the skills that a child needs so that when they enter school, their brains are ready. They have that strong foundation to build their actual reading skills. Libraries are very little engaged in the actual instruction of reading, but we are very, very connected to preparing children with all those skills they need so they can hit school running and being ready to read. A very popular program that most Colorado libraries are actively involved in is Every Child Ready to Read. And there are 5 practices that we say we do in our library, and we encourage caregivers to do at home in order to get those kids ready to read. And those are talking, singing, reading, writing, and playing. And we're going to focus really on 3 of those today: the talking, the reading, and the playing. So talking is the single most important thing that adults can do for children. These simple interactions build really strong positive relationships. And those positive relationships are really important to children. Children that have stronger bonds with the caring adults in their life are really able to have that resiliency and are able to thrive even when faced with adversity. The more we talk with children as well, the bigger the vocabulary gets. And that's why I always encourage adults to not shy away from using big words. The more children hear those big words in conversation, the more ready they are when they encounter those words when they read. And so this always brings up this idea of baby talk. And there are 2 kinds of baby talk. One we refer to as parentese. And this is the way that almost instinctively humans talk to small creatures like babies and puppies. That little lilting like, "Oh, aren't you the sweetest? Do you have a ball?" And it's that inflection in the voice. But the words are just regular human words. But they have seen babies' brains just light up. Now, baby talk is when we actually just don't use real words. You know, the weedle beetle. That is not necessarily helpful to children. Children need real words. They need big words. And it's also fine to give them words in any language. You know, a lot of the problems that we see in foreign language speaking families is that they want to only speak English, but they have a limited English vocabulary. If children get lots and lots of words in any language, again, it's all about building the foundation. It's the roadways. And if they have a really solid language foundation in their brain, it becomes much easier for them to learn new languages later on. So talking to kids in lots of words in any language is one of the keys to early literacy and learning later in life. Now, when we talk to kids, the way we do it can really make a difference. And there is one formula called serve and return that studies have shown just really activate that brain growth. And it really comes pretty naturally, but sometimes it's hard to find the time in your day to catch those moments because we're looking for the child to serve. So even with a baby, following their gaze, older toddlers are always pointing. Preschoolers may actually be asking, what's that? Why? These are the child's serves. And the more that adults are able to return that serve by supporting and encouraging it and giving those words, giving those vocabulary to explain what they're pointing at, what they're looking at, what they're asking about. That interaction is really key to learning. It also enhances those relationships, those bonds. And this is a really great way that anyone that encounters children can really kind of model and take advantage of. If you're standing in line at a grocery store and you see the kid in the cart pointing and pointing, looking at what they're, oh, do you see the picture of the dog? Isn't he a nice dog? I think that might be a golden retriever. These are just really easy, simple ways that have a huge lasting impact in the brain architecture of children. And we're actually going to watch this in action. There's a beautiful video of kind of how you can do this, even with children who are not yet talking, using that babble and returning it and using a very conversational dialogue with a kid who can't even talk yet. See if we can get this to go. I always do that.
Hi all, I just wanted to break in for a second. Are other folks having trouble hearing the sound? I can't hear the sound from the video.
I wonder. Thank you for letting me know, Eric. I wonder if we can, yeah. I'm gonna be all. Yep, I forgot to hit optimize for video clip. That's my fault. All right, let's see.
Yeah, it looks like other folks are having the same issue. So yeah, feel free just to, I think we could just start it over again.
Did you understand it though?
There we go.
Okay, let me get this bigger. All
right. We think a lot alike, huh? Oh, that's crazy. Right.
So I'm sorry that everyone didn't get to
hear the full thing. Though?
We'll get a little bit of the beginning again.
Huh? Oh no, not this one. This is the grand finale of it. Yeah, that's the last one. That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they did some stuff this time. Exactly what I was thinking. Oh yeah. Right. Don't bring that again. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah.
So, one of the things that I love about that is just how casual it is. We hear so much about how no screen time, but how impossible that is to really ask of most parents, just ban TV in the house. But really what they're saying is, we don't want children to be passively watching a screen, but that kind of interaction, even the fact that they're doing it in front of a TV, that is building their child's brain just by having these completely fake conversations with a child who clearly thinks he is talking, even if we can't understand what he thinks he's saying. One of the other really big studies that have come out of talking with children is the 30 million word gap. Some of you may have heard of this. It came out in the 90s and has been one of the instigators of so many services to young children. Now, there's also been a lot of recent controversy about it because this study was done several decades ago by a physical observer who came into people's homes for a very limited amount of time, tried to count words and extrapolate from there how many words a child would hear. Now we have technology that a child can just wear on them and actually count words, and they've now been able to replicate 30 million words. And the premise was that children often in low-income homes over the course of their early childhood will versus children in more affluent homes hear a difference of 30 million words. So families who are more affluent are more likely to talk to their children. Low-income families, due to stress, due to work constraints, the children hear less words. Now, is it really 30 million words? Probably not. Probably closer to 4 million based on recent studies. But it's not the exact amount of words that matters. It's the correlation that was found between the number of words that a child hears before entering school and how that impacts their later success in school. And that has not changed. No matter what the factor is, families who talk more to their children, children who hear more words before they start school, do better at reading and do better at school in general. And this is one really simple thing that we can control. It doesn't cost money. It doesn't take special services to really promote this and increase the amount of talk that children hear. Another way to really increase that is also through reading. Reading does so much for our kids because books tend to use more unusual words than in our normal conversations. Reading books to kids really helps build their vocabulary. Reading also builds those relationships, not only between the parent and the child, but between the child and the book. So this is why we say, reading to babies matters. They probably don't understand the story. They don't even really understand what reading is, but they're getting this feeling of joy, and they're going to associate it with books because we cuddle them and we read in nice voices, and that relationship with books can carry very far into their life. And again, remembering how much repetition strengthens those brain connections. Looking back at that early picture, seeing how as adults we get those really stronger pathways in our brain. Those are built through repetition. Those are built through reading Brown Bear, one more time. So when children ask again for the same book, just remind yourself, you are building this child's brain with that repetition. Children also benefit from print-rich environments. This is also one of those really big indicators of later school success, but just how many books are in the home. Now, when we measure just books that are owned, this can also be just a devastating statistic. In middle-income homes, on average, there are about 30 books per one child. In very high poverty areas, there is one book for every 300 children. And libraries, again, can really be the catalyst for change there, particularly libraries such as Estes Valley, who have done away with late fees and fines and getting away those financial barriers that can really add up, especially with children's books. And so bravo for taking away that hurdle and really helping get books into the hands of children. And again, even those babies who are going to chew them and the toddlers who are going to rip the pages, because part of learning to read is just learning how a book works. This is why pointing to words is also huge, both when you're actually reading a book. um, there's a point where children finally realize that you're just not making up a story. You're actually making sense of these symbols on a page. These are words that we read, but also just all around us. This is a great way for community members and friends and families to also really get involved. Um, when you're around children and they notice a sign, using that serve and return, pointing to the sign, pointing out that word and reading the word. That is a huge connection for children and is a really big part of their early literacy. As is being able to identify as a reader. And this is why diverse books matter. The motivation to read often comes from the joy we find in reading. And there is a special joy in seeing yourself reflected in a book. And unfortunately, as you can see in this infographic of the children's books publishing industry, there's a lot of people missing from the books that are being published. And so really being able to advocate for that diversity in children's books, because diversity doesn't only benefit the minority children. It's also been shown that when white children read about people different than them, it does a lot to teach them empathy. And really, there's a lot of social emotional learning that comes from that. Identifying as a reader also means giving kids the freedom to choose their own books. I struggle with this because I know so many great books that I want my kids to read, but just letting them go in and grab the book that they want. And really having access to those books, being able to grab them and touch them. I know in the library, it can be painful sometimes to watch kids pulling books off the shelf. Just remind yourself that that is part of their reader identity right now. There's also a beautiful phase that children get to, especially those that have been read to since birth, where they suddenly decide that they are a reader. And they are going to pick up that book that you've read to them 50 times, that they have pretty much memorized. Or sometimes they'll just pick up a book and tell you about the pictures. Now, these are 3-4-year-olds. They are not actually reading the pictures on the words on the page the way that adults would, but they are reading and really encouraging that. Too often as adults, we want to dismiss it. Oh, they're not really reading. Yes, they are. And if they're able to identify themselves as a reader when they start school, that confidence is going to make a big difference. And finally, we want to talk about play. There is a very famous quote from Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. Play is the work of childhood. And it's through play that children practice these social, physical, and cognitive skills. Play creates a very low-risk environment to practice all of this new learning. That's why children so often will, when they choose to do pretend play, they want to do adult things. They want to play restaurant. They want to play school. They want to practice these skills in a safe place before they have to do them in the real world. New learning that is presented in a playful, child-centered way is more likely to be remembered. So instead of doing flashcards of numbers and shapes, count toys as you play with things that are different shapes. Anything that's introduced in a playful way really activates babies' brains and makes it more easy for them to. How very young children play may look different from how we remember play. So let's take a moment and just recall a time from your own childhood. What did you love to play? How did you play as a kid? And I'm willing to bet that that moment that you're recalling probably from a time when you were between the ages of 4 and 8. Because this is when we start really making a lot of those personal memories. Our brain is remembering so much things, but we don't have that personal narrative until much later. And you're probably remembering a time when you're engaged in pretend play or a sport or some kind of constructive play, because that's a really popular play for preschool age and school age children. We don't really remember how we played when we were infants. And so it's hard sometimes to see the play happening there. A lot of times that play is more solitary, a little bit more chaotic. But play comes in many forms. Now I wanted to share with you a recent headline that may have come through your newsfeed, because this came out this January. The alarming study finds children who attended a state-funded pre-K were worse off than their peers. Oh, when I saw this, it broke my heart. As someone who is an advocate for early learning, living in a state that just passed universal preschool, this is a devastating headline, particularly because, myself included, so many people do not read past the headline. So let's fix this headline. Because the problem is not that this happened in Tennessee. The results of the study were accurate. The children that attended this pre-K program had more behavioral problems, more disattention in school years on. But the reason is not that it was state funded. The reason is that they chose an incredibly academic curriculum. They took kindergarten and made it for preschool and offered it to preschool. They took preschool children and put them in classrooms that didn't have a bathroom in the room. They had to walk down the hall and stand in line and be perfectly quiet. And this is not developmentally appropriate. And it is not play-based. They were expected to sit at tables and do desk work and had very academic. So what this headline should say is that there is an alarming study that finds children who attend academically based pre-K can be worse off than their peers. Because again, children learn through play. And one of the reasons that you cannot just expect a preschooler to learn like a kindergartner is this very, very important suite of skills called executive function. Executive function is how we learn how to learn. These are a lot of our life skills. One way to think of executive function is like an air traffic controller, taking all the thoughts and all the stimulus that come into our brain and directing it into the right place. Or like a conductor conducting an orchestra of what needs to be focused on right now. And like everything else, these executive function skills are learned through play. When you play Simon Says, when you listen to those songs that have instructions of like throw the scarf and catch, following those directions, having to resist touching your head because Simon didn't say it. That's executive function. And children need to have these skills in place to be able to sit, to be able to focus, follow a teacher's instructions, recall the facts that they're learning. And so when we put children in these very upper level school settings, they're simply not ready. Executive function can also be inhibited by toxic stress situations. So children living in high poverty, children experiencing a lot of emotional disruption in their lives can really have a hard time forming these skills. And this right here can really be the key to why some children thrive and others do not. So really giving attention to to this. Pretend play is an excellent way to build executive function. Children are planning out with their peers, like what we're going to do. Well, I'm going to be the waiter and you're going to order this and you're going to be the cook. When they build with blocks, they have to make a plan. They have a plan of what that tower is going to look like. And when it all falls to pieces, they have to manage those emotions. These play situations is the best way to build executive function. And then later when they're in school, they can put all that in practice. There's one more little aspect of play that I always like to point out, and that is schema play. Now, the official definition is spontaneous patterns of play that children use to understand how the world works. But I like to think of it as why really young children do odd and often annoying things over and over and over. You have probably seen a lot of these schemas in play. The reason that a toddler in a high chair throws their spoon down, or some children who will just take anything they pick up and throw it as far as they can. There's a name for that. That's trajectory play. They're actually learning cause and effect. They're learning about their autonomy. How far can I throw it? Another one of my favorites is transportation schema, where kids just want to gather things up over here and move it over there. That's very fun in the library with books. But trying to understand that this is not just kids misbehaving. This is kids playing. When kids hide things, we have a little oven, a little toy oven, and the thing that you find in that oven is amazing. But that is containment play. What's amazing about schema play is that you find it in children across cultures. And it usually starts appearing between like 18 months to 5 or 6 years. And it really starts to dwindle once children start formal school. The later that children start formal school, the longer that schema play lasts, which is an interesting correlation. These patterns also tend to be very repetitive. Children will kind of latch onto a schema at a time and they'll want to do it over and over and over. Because again, repetition is building those brain connections. They're going to do these until the world starts to make sense. And so I always like to point this out because some behaviors of toddlers can be so frustrating. When you walk into the library and you see that a child has taken all of the books off the shelf and lined them up across the floor. You're like, why? Why would you do this? They're exploring a schema. They're learning how things can connect. They're comparing sizes. And while that's still not really how you treat books in a library, I think it really helps us to understand that all of these things that children do really directly tie to how their brains are building. And the more that they build that strong foundation in the brain, the easier it is for them to learn and succeed and thrive.